you covered the campaign extensively. You covered both conventions. You covered the primaries. Did this election result? I feel like this is a good place to start, sort of chronologically. Did the results surprise you? Was it consistent with your expectations based on your experience on the campaign trail at the two conventions? What were your expectations going in, and did the results meet them?
No, it was very much consistent with my expectations. Back in March, when Biden was still the presumed Democratic nominee, I wrote an article basically indicating that there were a number of structural factors that pointed to Trump having the advantage. And I do this thing that the political scientists of the world apparently haven't picked up on, neither have the journalists, and I admit it's kind of an opaque, an obscure kind of methodology. But there is some predictive value I've found in the primary election data. So what you have to do is take primary turnout 1 year and then compare it to the previous cycle. So, for example, in 2016, the primary turnout for the Republicans was much higher than the 2012 Republican turnout, and that portended a Republican advantage in 2016 in the general election because you have more mobilization and activation among the party's core voters. Whereas if you compare the 2016 Democratic Party turnout to 2008, the last time that there was a contested Democratic primary, turnout was way down. So even though that's what enabled Bernie Sanders to actually get kind of a leg up on Hillary, or at least be competitive, because the overall turnout was down, and so he was bolstered by this activated core of his activist-minded supporters. And then in 2020, the Democratic turnout for the primaries was massive compared to 2016. And it's not a perfect heuristic, but I did think that the primary turnout data, as far as it was available from 2024 for the Republicans, had some positive omens for Trump that were not evident in 2020. And then also there was this issue of incumbency advantage. Trump was unique historically in that he was running as kind of a quasi-incumbent. So he had some of the advantages of running as an incumbent, meaning more than universal name recognition, on top of what tended to have happened for lots of presidents when they leave power, which is that public recollections of their tenure in office tend to improve amongst the public with hindsight. Now, that could just be nostalgia. That could be like an irrational improvement of the opinion. But either way, if you look at like George W. Bush's approval ratings several years after he leaves office, they go way up. Same with Barack Obama, same with Bill Clinton. And Trump was unique in that he was able to marshal that tendency into an active electoral campaign. So I thought that was, maybe that was so trivially obvious of an advantage for Trump that people kind of overlooked it. But I thought it was extremely salient. And then just kind of supplementing that observation with some anecdotal evidence or anecdotal observations, like in the final week or so in Pennsylvania, I talked to maybe 15 voters who I would characterize as low propensity voters.
Right.
Because I was trying to see, like, what is the character, what is the profile of a so-called undecided voter? And I did write an article about this for Newsweek, actually, and then some stuff on Substack. And my impression was, and I've long thought variations of this, but what I sort of reiterated a few weeks ago was that the typical pundit or media understanding of an undecided voter is kind of incorrect. It's not that somebody is waiting till the very last minute necessarily to make a last-minute decision between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. More commonly, it's somebody who's deciding whether it's in their interest or worth their time to vote at all. And among those voters, who I would just kind of randomly encounter in Pennsylvania and also in other states, North Carolina, Nevada, Georgia, overwhelmingly, those people had a soft preference for Trump, like if you press them.
Right.
Now, is that just because of Trump's celebrity power? That's probably a factor. He was president before. people don't recall the years 2017 to 2021 being like a tyrannical hellscape necessarily, despite what the Democrats wanted to insist. And also there was dissatisfaction with the incumbent, and on economic grounds and other grounds. So my impression was that given that there was such a wide reservoir, seemingly, of people who, if they just had a little bit of prodding or pushing, would vote for Trump, but you couldn't really find an analog of like this of low propensity inactivated voters who were kind of just like natural Democrats. That to me suggested another advantage for Trump, and you really only had to activate a small percentage of them for Trump to have an electoral benefit. So yeah, I mean, no, the outcome was pretty much aligned with what I would have expected. I even said to like a journalist friend of mine, like when we were just going around Bethlehem, Pennsylvania together on the weekend before the election, like all the anecdotal data is telling us that Trump is going to win, right? Because like everybody we encountered who had like this low propensity attitude toward voting, but might have been urged to vote for Trump, was saying that they had a preference for Trump, even people who you wouldn't expect, like I don't know, Latino woman or a large share of minorities. And actually, that was another trend that got missed that also redounded to Trump's favor in 2020, which a lot of Republican analysts decided to just dismiss wholesale as fraudulent and not like learn any lessons from the results. There were the first signs of this gigantic shift to Trump among Latino voters in particular. Like Trump made inroads about several like 10 or 20 points, I think, in the Rio Grande Valley in South Texas, where the counties are like 95+% Latino. And in 2024, sure enough, he won them outright. And I was saying in 2020, look, I mean, Republicans, to the extent that any of them will listen to me, I know that you're all fraud pilled and you don't even want to acknowledge any of these results at all. But if you do kind of sift into the data rather than just screaming fraud, you'll find some like positive omens potentially for a Republican, including Trump himself, in a subsequent electoral cycle. And that was borne out. Trump even like overperformed in 2020 in urban areas.
Yeah, that was the most diverse Republican coalition since Nixon.
Well, this is, I think, what a lot of people, ourselves included, missed, because the trends seem to be post-Dobbs that Democrats were overperforming everywhere. That would happen here, but Trump wasn't on the ballot, which a lot of people said. A lot of people said no, Trump is the missing ingredient. You can't determine how people are going to vote with him on the ballot based on that. Apparently so. I mean, a lot of people, again, ourselves included, thought abortion was going to be such an overwhelming issue as it had been in every post-Dobbs election virtually, where you're seeing these crazy results out of Kansas, where you're seeing special elections favoring Democrats, no red wave in 2022. But your observation, I read your Substack about that. That's an interesting point, that presidents become more popular when they leave office. And he had that going for him. So he was really the X factor. Like if it had been DeSantis, maybe Kamala would have won. This is very specific to Trump.
Well, he also had it both ways, because Trump is also great as a bomb thrower running against an unpopular incumbent, or great as an outsider. So he had the best of both worlds, because he's a former president, so he has incumbency, but he's also not the sitting president, so he can play outsider at the same time.
Yeah, I was even saying that in during the Republican primaries in 2016, when very few people were saying it. It was largely assumed in the media class and even in the Republican kind of operative world that Trump was obviously the weakest Republican candidate that the Republicans could nominate. To me, the opposite seemed true. What it seemed to me was that Trump could actually appeal to a certain segment of the electorate by virtue of his celebrity power, by virtue of his slightly heterodox policy positions, although that's kind of been mooted to some extent as he attained office and kind of just got melded into the Republican consensus. but that Trump was much better positioned to win a general election because, in order to win someplace like Pennsylvania, you have to appeal to like a downscale, low propensity, maybe a conservative disposition type voter who's like not overtly political and can be mobilized, like using some tactics that I don't think would have been available to a Ted Cruz or a Marco Rubio in 2020 or 2016 rather, or even a Ron DeSantis in 2024. So yeah, I agree that Trump was always best positioned to win as a Republican, whatever downsides or foibles he might have. And as far as the Dobbs thing, yeah, I mean, for a long time now, I think ever since 2017, like in the entire Trump era, basically, Democrats have been overperforming in stuff like special elections, which are very low turnout elections. You have to be a highly engaged voter to even know that a special election is happening, to fill, for example, a vacancy in a House seat. And also that applies to some extent to midterm elections, because midterm elections also heavily select for people who are much more engaged in the political process in general. And Republicans used to overperform in those low turnout elections, right? The Democrats are the ones who are always trying to corral these lower propensity voters who comprised a certain portion of their coalition, but it's flipped now. And so, although people who are highly animated by the abortion issue obviously favor the Democrats, I never thought that principle was going to apply to a general election, which is just a vastly, radically different electorate in terms of scope and size and dynamics at play. So whereas that might have like saved Democrats from losing the Senate in 2022, I don't think it was that necessarily applicable into the general election. It explains the Republican turnout dynamic as well, because Trump obviously galvanizes a lot of opposition. So Trump just being in the ether, Trump just being like a prominent political figure who's not on the ballot, probably advantages Democrats in the main, because you could still point to Trump, say, look, these Republicans on the ballot are doing Trump's bidding. They're all going along with the MAGA agenda. But the Republican candidates can't galvanize comparable support for themselves because they can't necessarily appeal to the Republicans who just want to vote for Trump. Like, look at the Senate elections. Look at the Senate elections, or look at what happened in 2024. Republicans lost the Senate elections in Nevada, in Wisconsin, in Michigan, and only barely won in Pennsylvania.
They lost in Arizona, too.
In Arizona, that's right. Yeah. Despite Trump winning those states handily overall.
Right.
So there's like a turnout gap there for the generic Republican candidate versus Trump. Like, Trump overperforms the standard Republican.
Right.
So in an off-year cycle or in a special election, that disadvantages the Republican, but it advantages Trump when he's on the ballot, because you're getting people who don't who can claim that they dislike the Republican brand or something, but nonetheless support Trump. I think it's kind of a myth or a fiction to suggest that Trump is somehow can be disentangled from the Republican brand at this point. I mean, like, who dominates the Republican Party more than Trump in 2024? I don't think a single political figure has ever dominated the Republican Party more than Donald Trump at this juncture. But nonetheless, in terms of public presentation and political appeals made, voters sometimes do have that differentiation in their minds, however kind of ill-founded, and that does tend to benefit Trump and disadvantage Republicans in off-year cycles, as I've explained.
Please clap.